Okay, good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are, I guess. This session is entitled Credit Cards, EFT, ACH, and e-checks and VFP. Now, according to the official rules of the Visual Fox Fest, which are a continuation of the rules from Southwest Fox, I am required at this point to tell you why you should listen to me. I'm not really sure why you should listen to me, except that I'm here right now, so we'll go over some reasons that I thought of. My company develops and markets vertical applications for nonprofit organizations. We also do custom software and website development. We just finished a large towing system for a large city that all of their tows are managed by our software. We provide consulting and advisory services to companies of all sizes, from local one-person businesses up to Fortune 500 companies like AVS Rent-A-Car. Me personally, I've been working with Fox since it was Fox Base, back in the days of CompuServe and Fox Base, for anybody here old enough to remember that. I've written for magazines. I've spoken a number of times at Southwest Fox, and I enjoy expanding the abilities of VFP, and I'm looking forward to this presentation today. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off my video so that you'll be able to maximize the amount you can see on the screen. And we're off. Right. Actually, today we're going to have a little help from our session before we get into the details. We're going to have a little help from the session from Credit Card Man. Now, Credit Card Man is going to pop in from now and then to lend us a hand as we need it. And hopefully he'll be able to assist us in understanding the material that we have here today. Now, a lot of times, it's very common for today for users to assume that their software will be able to process credit cards or other financial transactions as part of the software system. Maybe it's a credit card charge or an ACA bank account transfer or something along those lines. So what we're going to do is we're going to learn today about credit cards, ACH, e-check transactions, and how they work. We will define the necessary terms. We'll identify the external information and processes needed to perform this functionality in our VFP application. It's going to be a very knowledge-intensive session. There's going to be some coding, but the emphasis is more on understanding the concepts and the ideas and the facts that we need in order to be able to not only internalize this information ourselves, but in order to be able to speak to the users, the end users, on an intelligent basis to try and figure out what their needs are. Because to try and figure out what their needs are, we have to, A, understand the issue ourselves, and B, be able to explain it to them. Because a lot of times they might think they have a need that really doesn't fit with the technical capabilities, and we have to be able to explain that to them. And we also have to understand what can be done and what can't be done. So it's going to be a lot of knowledge-intensive tasks that we're going to be doing today. The session goals, I think, will be fine. Now, it is important to mention the following copyright information. Copyrights are serious, and all illustrations in my presentation today are copyright 2022. By the incredible, talented, wonderful, skilled, amazing, incredible illustrator, Nessie Schiff. Now, I have to tell you that she is probably the most effective and imaginative and brilliant illustrator basically in the world. I would have to say, maybe of all time. Now, this is a completely objective opinion. This has nothing to do with the fact that she's related to me, but truly, I think you'll see that really, she's really good at this. And I think that she deserves her title of World Illustrator Champion and Best Daughter. All right, let's get started. The starting point in educating ourselves about payment processing is without a doubt credit cards. Not only are credit cards ubiquitous, but credit cards are the first thing consumers often think about for payment processing. If someone is planning to pay online or pay electronically, the first thing they think of is a credit card. And to the end user, to the consumer, to the card holder, a credit card transaction is a pretty simple thing. The truth is not like that. The truth is the credit card processing system is a far more complex system than the typical point of sale user even realizes. A large part of it is not going to directly affect our software development, but nonetheless, we need to understand how it works in order to be able to interface with our users. The first thing we need to learn a few terms. The first term we need to learn is a charge card. Now, credit cards is often used as a generic term for several payment devices. The original credit cards go back to the 1960s, when Diners Club issued a card for traveling businessmen. Now, this greatly simplified their travel and payments. No need to carry checks and cash. However, this was what is actually a charge card, meaning that each month the user paid the entire balance. It was a convenience. I will charge it and then I will on this card, and then I will pay it for it. A convenience to be sure, but not nearly the same thing as what we call a credit card today. Interestingly enough, even today, you can hear people of a certain generation pick up a Visa and say, I'm using my charge card. Now, really, the only major charge card in existence today is American Express. American Express cardholders pay their balance off each month, somewhat like the original Diners Club. And American Express primarily markets their card to people with frequent business-related expenditures. So charge cards are not the same as credit cards. The main charge card now is American Express. The next kind of card is an actual credit card. A credit card is defined as a card issued by a financial company, giving the holder an option to borrow funds, usually at point of sale. They charge interest and are primarily used for short-term financing. A credit card is a loan to yourself. When I purchase something on a credit card, I can let that balance roll over a number of months and pay interest on it the same way as if I went to the bank and took out a personal loan. So a credit card is the ability to buy something that you don't have money for and give yourself a personal loan to do it. Credit cards, Visa, Discover, MasterCard, and American Express, Visa, MasterCard, and Discover are the primary credit cards in use in North America. Now, there are actually prepaid and postpaid credit cards where you get a bill each month versus whether you put an initial balance on the card. We're probably familiar with that. There is a difference in it, but for our purposes, it's going to be treated the same. There will be no practical difference in it. There are some differences, but we're not going to really address that. And our final kind of card is a debit card. Now, debit cards originally, if people remember, were distinct looking. It didn't look like a credit card. It looked like an ATM bank withdrawal card. Nowadays, they look like credit cards. And the card has two uses, as a credit card and as a debit card. The debit card has absolutely nothing to do with credit cards. And in fact, you cannot even process a debit card on a credit card system. Debit cards require their own specialized terminal. And even though it looks like the same card, it's completely different. You cannot take a piece of VFP software and write an API in there to process debit cards. You have to have a terminal and you have to be set up to do it. And it's not a small undertaking. So therefore, the vast majority of times, probably every time that we're dealing with software development, we're not going to be dealing with debit cards. So when we talk about credit cards today, we're really going to be talking about charge cards and credit cards. So those are the first definitions that we need to have. Charge cards and credit cards. And there are debit cards that we probably will not be dealing with in our development career. The next term we need to know are credit card networks. Now, this is not a network in the sense of a local area network where data is transmitted, but rather it's an association that controls a particular credit card. In fact, they're colloquially known as card associations or card brands. Each credit card has a master organization that controls the use of that credit card, and it sets any rules or requirements. MasterCard, Visa, American Express, and Discover each have their own credit card networks. And those networks maintain absolute control over all facets of their credit card operations. You cannot accept MasterCard unless you follow whatever rules the MasterCard network has in place. Merchants, consumers, banks are all bound by these rules. MasterCard is the only one that can make them and the only one that can change them. If you've ever heard of somebody being concerned that some action that took place in their business could result in them losing their merchant privileges, they're not talking about the banks. They're talking about the credit card network pulling their privileges. Even banks are bound by the rules of the credit card networks. So we have our different kinds of cards, and we have our credit card networks as our initial terms that we need to know. Now, once we have those terms, we have to understand who's who in credit cards. And this is something that is not really something that is publicized very well because it's a little complicated. The first thing that is part of a credit card network of transactions is something called an acquiring bank. Now, these acquiring banks are the actual credit card processors, and they handle the transfer of all monies between the banks and the accounts. Acquiring banks are mostly unknown to the general public and not that much better understood by professionals. There are only a relatively small number of acquiring banks in each country. In a large country like the United States, there may be 30 or 40 of these institutions, and they're almost always large banks. When we ask a merchant, oh, who is your credit card processor? That's really the question we're looking for. What acquiring bank is processing the money for your transactions? So an acquiring bank is the first part of the who's who of a credit card processing network. The second part is what's called the issuing bank. The issuing bank we're more familiar with. If I get a MasterCard from Citibank and it says Citibank MasterCard on it, Citibank is the issuing bank. The issuing bank creates the cards, and it decides what the limits will be on the account. It decides how much the cardholder will be able to charge. It's responsible for the monthly statements. This is as far back, really, as far in the back end of the processing chain that most users or consumers would ever be able to contact. You cannot call an acquiring bank and ask them something. Acquiring banks only deal with banks. The issuing bank is about as far back in the chain as the consumer is going to be able to go. Now, in addition to the issuing bank, we have the card network that we previously mentioned. Now, these card networks, in a confusion of terms that I don't know if it was deliberate, but it's very confusing. The card network is the association that manages the card brand. The card network is also the transmission network. Each card network has its own transmission network running off of a VPN over the public network. So when the banks communicate about a MasterCard, they have to do it only on the MasterCard network. And when they communicate about a Visa, they have to do it only on the Visa network. So each card network maintains its own card network to send information back and forth. It's a little bit confusing because the same term is used for both things, but think of it as a card network owns a card network. So we have the acquiring bank, the issuing bank, the card network, then we have what's called a gateway. Now, in the old days, merchant transactions were done using a terminal. You'd swipe your card at the terminal, and a gateway was something that didn't really exist. There was no need for a gateway. These terminals connected into phone lines, and the phone line would dial directly into the network, into the MasterCard network, and communicate with the acquiring bank. But with the ability to use credit cards online in commerce, or even to accept credit cards via the internet, or to be able to take credit cards simply by typing in the information, there's no more phone line. So originally, companies created software that mimicked phone lines and dialed the internet. However, nowadays, gateways have taken all of those functions over, and gateways take all the information that the terminal would have taken, the card number, etc. They take all that virtual information, and they forward it to the acquiring bank. So they have inserted themselves where the terminal used to be. They take all that information, they forward it to the acquiring bank, and they communicate back to the merchant. That gateway portion didn't used to exist because it was all in a little terminal. But now gateways perform that function, and we'll see how important that is as we go through along. Next is we have the reseller. Now, the reseller are independent companies that sell credit card services to merchants. They're typically affiliated with an acquiring bank, and sometimes the bank itself will be a reseller. But resellers receive a commission on every transaction the merchant processes. And those commissions are paid indefinitely as long as the merchant is active. There are, similar to sales territories, there are master resellers, there are state-level resellers, and there are local resellers. The reseller is often who the merchant thinks is processing their credit card. Oh, you know what? The Embassy Bank Card Company is processing my credit cards. The Doug Processing Company is processing my credit cards. The Doug Processing Company or Embassy Bank Cards is just an office with paperwork in it. Those resellers are just simply salespeople, and they have absolutely nothing to do with the process of the credit cards once the merchant is signed up. The problem is merchants think that the reseller is their credit card processor, or if they get really confused, maybe the gateway is, or at least the issuing bank, and they have no idea how this connects. Most merchants think the reseller is their credit card processor. I cannot tell you how many times I've asked a merchant, okay, who is your credit card processor? And they will say, oh, the Doug Card System. Oh, really? Yes. But Doug Card System is two guys in an office reselling credit card merchant services from Citibank. So the reseller is really just an overgrown sales force for the acquiring banks. But they present themselves with names like bank card processing and similar names that make the merchants think that they're actually responsible for processing the credit cards, thus leading to even more confusion. We have the merchant, of course. That's a store or seller who provides the goods and services. Now, these resellers give the merchant either a card machine or set them up to do the transaction via software on a gateway. And we'll see how that works in just a moment. At the very, very, very bottom of the food chain are the actual card holders making the transactions, making the purchases. These 7 entities combine to determine the financial structure of every credit card transaction. Now, we're going to see exactly how that works when we figure out who exactly gets paid. Credit card fees seem like a simple thing. So, for example, in my office here, we take credit cards. If you wish to pay for your services via credit card, we'll let you. So we take the credit card, and our reseller has told us we're paying a 2.75% fee. We pay 2.75% of every transaction. So that would seem to be the credit card processing fee. Boy, is it not. The fee for credit card processing is something called an interchange fee. If you've ever read in the Wall Street Journal or a business publication that MasterCard or Visa is thinking of raising the interchange fee, and you've noticed it doesn't seem to affect you, that's because it may or may not affect you. The acquiring banks who process the transactions between the different banks, they set something called the interchange fee. And that interchange fee is fixed, it's non-negotiable, and you either pay it or you don't. There's absolutely no way to get a different interchange fee from a credit card processor or an acquiring bank. It cannot be done. Now, sometimes their fees have different scales and structures to them. For example, a card present transaction where the cardholder actually presents the card is generally a lower rate on an interchange fee than something like a not card present, because a not card present is considered riskier. Is the person really the holder of that card or not? If they're standing there and they have the card in their hand and their name matches on the card matches their ID, then you're going to get a pretty good rate of interchange fee. If not, there are 2 different ways that the credit card processors try and verify that you're really the card holder. The first is called the address verification system. You've probably noticed when you call to have a credit card or you enter one online, they often ask you for the billing address. The address that your credit card bill is sent to. They usually ask for the street address, the city, and the zip code. Parenthetically, the city is not part of the system, and they don't have to ask for that. It's the address and the zip code. Now, this AVS system is managed for all major cards by MasterCard, which charges about a penny for each fee. So when the credit card processor is looking to see, does all the information match, they'll also check the address and the zip code. If the address and the zip code match, you'll get an even better interchange fee. Another thing that affects the interchange fee is a way that the banks use to minimize their risk, and that is the CVV code. Now, CVV code is interesting because historically it was not designed to be given out. It was only a tool for use by other banks. And in fact, originally it was illegal for a company to ask you for a CVV number. In time, however, it became a major tool in fraud prevention because it's always on the opposite side of the credit card as the actual card number. The theory is, in order to know both the card number and the CVV, you must be holding the card in your hand. Now, the CVV can never be required. It's not allowed to be required, but it generally will provide you with a lower interchange fee because the credit card processor, the acquiring bank, considers it a lower risk of fraud when you have a CVV and or an AVS. So these may affect the interchange fee, but it's the same for everybody. Absolutely no difference. But wait, you say, not every merchant pays the same rate, do they? I may be paying 2.75%, and the office next to me may be paying 2.65%. Well, they absolutely all pay the same rate, except they don't. And that is, they all pay the same interchange fee. But the resellers can add on their own surcharges. So my 2.75% could be an interchange fee of 1.5% before the surcharges. It is impossible almost for a merchant to decipher what the interchange fee really is. And even if he could, it would be of minimal benefit. But this is how banks and resellers can compete and offer fees lower than their competitors. The way they undercut their competitors is they can't change the processing fees. They're just lowering their surcharges. There's no such thing as a lower processing rate. However, the sales departments of these resellers who wish to make a certain amount of markup, a certain amount of surcharges, and in the right situation will lower those surcharges. That's how they can undercut the competition. So we have an interchange, pardon me, we have the interchange rate is 2.5%. Now the reseller comes along and says, Mr. Merchant, I can offer you a rate of 3.1%. The merchant thinks, wow, 3.1%, that is so much better than the other guy. The other guy is also paying 2.0%. He's just getting a higher surcharge. If you think it's not complicated enough already, we're going to make it a little more complicated. We've got cards and we've got credit card networks. We've got acquiring banks, issuing banks, gateways, resellers, merchants, and credit card networks all have to come together in order to process one transaction. Let's see how that works. There are 7 steps and 1 gotcha to processing a credit card. Step number 1, the card holder swipes, taps, or inserts the card into the merchant machine or enter their number into an online e-commerce site. That's step number 1. Step number 2 is the merchant's credit card machine or the merchant software developed by a fine VFP programmer sends this card information to the acquiring bank via the internet, or not so much anymore, but it could still be by phone line. Alternatively, this information could be sent to a gateway, which will then forward it to the acquiring bank. So step 2 is this information is gathered and it's sent, maybe through a gateway, maybe not, it's sent to the acquiring bank. The acquiring bank receives this information and sends it along to the appropriate card network using the encrypted VPN for the particular type of credit card. The card network looks at that card number and routes the information to the cardholder's issuing bank. Part of the structure of the number of a credit card is within that number that identifies the bank that issued the card. So the acquiring bank takes all the information, puts it up on the network. The network finds the correct bank and sends it to it. The bank receives the information and checks the card details. It also ensures the cardholder's in good standing, there's enough money to cover the purchase, etc. Then that issuing bank sends a response back onto the card network, which sends it back to the acquiring bank. The response is then received by the merchant. Now, if all the credentials check out, the transaction will be approved. Otherwise, it'll show a message like denied. The cardholder will see this information right away and finishes the transaction while the response will be stored in the merchant's machine. All this happens in under 1 second, which is pretty amazing. We start off with the cardholder. The cardholder gives Delta his credit card information. Delta, either through a terminal or through a gateway, sends it to the acquiring bank. The acquiring bank puts it onto the credit card network. And after it puts it onto the credit card network sends it to the issuing bank. The issuing bank checks out this person's account. And if everything is okay, it'll log it okay. If not, it'll log denied. And it sends that information back to the acquiring bank. The acquiring bank then sends it back to Delta. And then Delta informs the consumer. And all that happens typically in about half of a second. Now, there is one gotcha. We have to settle on what that gotcha is. And I put settle in italics because I'm being humorous. The processing system at all these acquiring banks runs on mainframes from the 1980s and 1990s. All credit card processing transactions are actually batch processed at once, resulting in all the monies being transferred. So the acquiring bank has a whole list of all the transactions that were approved that day, and then it settles them and all the money gets transferred. No money ever changes hands in the United States without a settlement request, an active settlement request. If there's no active settlement request, the approved transaction will sit there forever and nobody will ever see any money. Now, a very, very large merchant like a Target might settle hourly. Most merchants, it's sufficient to settle once a day. And in fact, some gateways like Authorize.net will offer you a service where they will make sure to settle it each day for you. Otherwise, without settling it, you'll have a list of approved charges and you'll never see a dime. And no one will ever tell you about it. So 7 steps plus the settling is how a credit card process data gets moved around in order to get the approval or the denied. And if it's approved, it waits for a settlement. Now, we can also throw a little curveball into it, because besides charging a credit card, we can also do a pre-auth. A pre-auth means please set aside this money and make sure it's okay, but don't finalize it yet. A typical use of a pre-auth is a restaurant. When you get a check in a restaurant, you give them your credit card. They take it to the cash register, they run it through, and they bring it back, and you add the tip on and sign it. Now, how did they run it through if they don't know how much the total is? You can't do that. What they did is they obtained a pre-auth. They knew how much the bill was, and they guessed here's probably how much a tip might be, and they went and obtained a pre-authorization for that amount. Once you sign it and put the tip in, they go back to the register, and they send another transaction to finalize it. If you pre-auth something and never finalize it, it never goes through. It'll sit there forever. The credit card processing system is not a system designed to help you or tell you your mistakes. It's not. You have to be proactive, or else you'll never find out that these things are operating in error. The two other things we can do is we can void a transaction and issue credits. Now, it sounds like the same thing, really. The consumer returns an item and wants to get a credit back. So let's say they came to my office and they bought a hard drive for $100. They got it back home. They realized, oh, this is the wrong kind of hard drive. So they brought it back to me. I want to give them a $100 credit. That sounds pretty simple. Well, it's not. Because in that case, I would have to be able to, I would have to know the original transaction ID number and ask for the original transaction to be reversed. That's called voiding a transaction. I'd have to go in and say, this charge for $100, I would like for you to reverse it. That's called voiding a transaction. Issuing a credit is completely different. It means the merchant can enter any credit card number and credit any amount back to that card. So they bring the hard drive back to me, and I say, oh, this is open. I can't give you $100 back. I'll give you $50 back for it. So I type in their credit card number, and I say, I want a credit of $50. Now, this issuing credits is an invitation to fraud. It means any merchant can put in any credit card number and give any amount of credits. So therefore, typically a merchant has to be approved through an additional approval process to be able to actually issue credits. They can void transactions, but they cannot issue credits. I recently, a couple of weeks ago, I bought something from a restaurant for delivery. And it came, and there was a wrong item in it, an incorrect item. And I called them up, and I said, well, listen, can you just take that item off the bill? And they said, oh, we can't do that. We can only cancel out the whole transaction. So you know what? We'll give you a store credit for next time you come in. Now, why couldn't they just issue me a $10 credit? Because they can't issue credits. They could void my original transaction, but they don't want to do that. So if my order never showed up, they would have voided my original transaction. But since they only wanted to give me a $10 credit, they couldn't do that. So voiding a transaction, issuing credits are very, very different things. Now, what I'd like to do before we get into the next section is pause momentarily, and Doug can tell me if there are any questions.
There are a couple. One is, what are some of the names of the acquiring banks? Just out of curiosity, I think.
First National, Chase. Those are two that come into mind. There's several First Nationals that divisions, different branches in different parts of the country that are all acquiring banks. The last time I saw, there was about 40 some acquiring banks in the United States.
Okay. The other is the latest credit cards seem to have all the information on one side. The on mine, for example, it has my name and my credit card number and my CVV and the magnetic stripe all on the same side of the card. Any idea why they're doing that?
If the card has a chip,
yes,
then they're wanting you to use the chip. If you don't use the chip, that merchant is going to pay a lot for that transaction. So since people are using the chip, they've stopped. It's more expensive to put things on two different sides like that. So they've started making one side standard, on the other side, whatever they're doing. It's a bad practice, and the credit card networks don't like it. Because even though the merchant is supposed to be reading the chip, it's still a potential breach of security for all those things to be on one side. Especially now when I'm calling up over the phone or I'm ordering something online, I'm not using a chip. I'm typing it all in off of one side of the credit card. And that's a very controversial practice.
Okay. I think your camera is still on too, by the way.
Is it? I turned it off. I thought.
There we go. Okay, you're good.
Sorry about that.
That's it for questions.
Okay. Now we've got a whole lot of information that we're pumping into our brains here. Well, let's write a little code. In order to develop an actual coding system, we have to realize that we interact as developers with the credit card processing system at 6 different points. The first point is gateway information. In order to use a gateway, you need 2 things. You need a transaction key and an API key, which are long series of random numbers. Now, some gateways will call it a transaction key and a something else key, but there are always 2 keys. And in order to access the gateway, in order to post something to the gateway, you have to have those 2 keys. Generally, you have to request those keys from the gateway, but you can't do anything without those keys. That's the first point of intersection between us as developers and the credit card processing system. The second place where we interact is accepting the credit card information and performing software validation. Now, wait, I hear you say, software validation, won't the processor kick it back if the credit card has incorrect information on it? The answer is yes, it will. But the responsible thing to do is to validate what we can on our end before we send the information off. Because by being able to inform the user of exactly what they did wrong, we avoid the processor sending back a result like card denied or invalid information or some such thing when it was a simple typo that we could have taken care of ourselves. So at step number 2, before we go any further, we're going to validate the credit card information. And when we validate the credit card information, what we're trying to do is determine if the credit card number is a legitimate credit card number. That's the goal. We don't know anything about this account. We don't know anything about the person. We don't know anything about the credit card except, is this number legitimate? Is it a real credit card number? So if someone calls up or goes online with a stolen credit card number, this will not help. Parenthetically, we can actually use the credit card number to determine other information about the card issuer, what country it is, what bank it is, etc. But we want to validate the overall legitimacy of the card. And in order to validate the overall legitimacy of the card, we do two things. The first thing we do is we check the first digit and the length of the card number. The first digit of the card tells us, the first digit and the length of the card number must be a valid combination. Let's take a look. So I send a card number, and it's pretty much a very simple algorithm. If the card number starts with 34 or 37, it has to be 15 characters long. If it starts with a 4, then it can be 16 or 13. If it starts with a 2, it starts with 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, then it has to be 16 characters long. And if it starts with a 6011, then the number has to be 16 characters long, and it's a Discover card. So American Express, Visa, MasterCard, and Discover each have their own rules about how to combine that initial digit with the number of characters in the card number. Notice, it's not always 16 characters. People are under the mistaken impression that when they create a field for a credit card number, they should put 16 characters in it. We have 16 characters, we have 15 characters, we have 13 characters. Many times, American Express users will read their card number to someone on the phone, and the person will insist that's not the right number. There aren't enough digits. Because American Express card can have 13 digits instead of 16. So the first thing we're doing is making sure that this could theoretically be a valid number. Could be. If it doesn't pass this test, then it can't be a valid number. So now we've done step one. Parenthetically, it's interesting to note that the first digits, 3, 4, 5, and 6, indicate Amex, Visa, MasterCard, and Discover. And in our experience, what we're going to do in Visual Fox Pro, you're rarely going to see any other numbers. But the other numbers are for private branded cards. Not private branded MasterCards or Visa. But for example, if Shell Oil makes a card to use at their gas stations, the number will start with a 7. We cannot process those cards over any kind of a gateway or network. Those are all proprietary systems that we can't access, but it's interesting to know nonetheless that these are the numbers that are used. And nobody knows what they're holding number 9 for. Now, this is all based in North America. So, for example, in Japan, there are other cards and other numbers. All right, so now we validated the combination of the first digit and the length. We have to validate the checksum digit. The checksum digit is the very last number in the credit card number. We loop through all these digits, and we'll see that we multiply each one by a weight, and we divide, and we end up with one digit. That digit has to match the last digit of the card's number. The last digit of the card number is nothing but a checksum digit, and we always validate from right to left. I don't know why that is, and nobody I've ever asked seems to know why that is, but all credit cards numbers are validated with a checksum right to left. Let's see how we do that. So we've got our credit card number, and we're going to, we're going to count down from however long it is, let's say 16 characters, minus 1. So the last digit, remember, the last digit is the checksum. So if it's a 16-character card, we want to validate numbers 15 through 1. So we're going to start from the size minus 1 down to 1, step negative 1. Then what we're going to do is we're going to extract that digit, and we multiply it by the weight. What weight is weight is a different number depending upon where in the credit card number this digit is located. Pardon me. It starts off at 2, and then it rotates between 2 and 1. So depending on what column we're in, we're going to multiply the digit in that column times 2 or times 1. And then we're going to add it to a running total. Now, when we finish adding it up, we have a running total. We divide it by 10. We subtract it from 10. And then we're left with one number. That number has to be the most right most right digit. That sentence didn't come out right. The digit on the right end digit. How's that? The right end digit. If it's not, you have a fraudulent card number. Not just a mistake. You literally have a fraudulently produced card. So by checking the length and by checking the checksum, we can validate, you know what, this is a legitimate credit card number. Whether the transaction is legitimate, whether the customer is legitimate, whether there's any money, we don't know. But now we can feel comfortable sending it on to our gateway and ask for an approval because we know that we're sending them a legitimate credit card number. And if it's not legitimate, we can show the user, oh, that's not a good number, invalid number. Along with validating simple things like name and address and city and zip, we can validate the actual card number. Now, there is no way to validate the expiration dates other than the fact that obviously it can't be in the past. But this card number has to be a legitimate card number, and then we're going to send it on. Or if you want to be really good at validating, you can just skip all that and swipe the card or put your chip in it. And what you get is a 2-track reading of a string that looks like this. All you do is take that string and send it to the processor. Don't have to do anything. Swipe, read it, send it on. Now you'll see in here information. So if you wanted to, for our database purposes, we could parse this. There's an algorithm for how to parse these. But we send it on just as it is. No preparation necessary, no validation necessary. We just send it on. The white paper has details about how you can parse a string like that if you would want to do that. All right, so we have got gateway information. We've accepted the card info, and we performed either software validation or we have a Stripe data to send in. Now we have to send the card information off to the gateway and process the reply. Pardon me. Now, we have standardized at our company all of our applications on authorized.net gateway. There's a number of gateways. Most of them are provided by a card issuer. Authorized.net is independent. And some of the gateways are newer and have better user portals even than authorized.net. But authorized.net we use because it's the gold standard. It was the first, it's the biggest. Just 40 years ago, if anybody can remember that far back, there was a saying, nobody ever got fired for recommending IBM. If the computer didn't work, you said, oh, I bought IBM. What do you want from me? So here, an equivalent might be, oh, what was I supposed to do? I used authorized.net. So that's one of the reasons that we standardize on it, and we require all of our clients to use authorized.net. And if they don't have an account, we set one up for them. So how are we going to send this information to authorized.net? Now, keep in mind that most gateways work very similarly. And since authorized.net was really the originator of this, most gateways are copying or deriving their technology from what authorized.net did. So what we have to do is we have to make a class that'll hold the many properties we require. We're going to post an HTTP string to the authorized.net's authorized.net API endpoint. And it requires a gazillion properties. It doesn't matter whether they're empty or not, most of them, but it requires a gazillion properties. Some of them are obvious. Is this a test request? What's the login? What's the company name? And it continues on. Emails, ship to last name, recurring billing, all bank ABA, just many of these things are not even relevant, but they all have to be filled in. And that is about all the properties we need for this class. And at the very bottom, you'll notice that we put status number, status text, and response text. Those actually are returned by the gateway. It's not something that we send to the gateway. We also have added a property called vPostData. And you'll see what vPostData does in just a second. So we have a class, credit card class. It has all the properties that we need in order to be able to send the information to authorized.net. It doesn't know what to do with them yet, but it has all the properties that we need. Now, we have a method called postData, which actually creates the string that we're going to use to post. And this is annoying, but only has to be done once in code. What we're going to do is we're creating X login equals, and then we're filling in the X login value. And then we're using the delimiter, X trans key, and the trans key. And we're going through that for every single property. It's a very long post string in the end. So we have a method. The title is cut off up here, but it's called post data, which takes all the information from the properties in this class, and it puts together the post string that we're going to use. Then we have another method called process. So we have post data, which puts it all together into one long string. And then we have process. Process updates the amount. It sets post data. And then it opens, in this case, secureauthorized.net, gateway transact DLL. Every gateway will be a little different. And it sends that. Now, once it's sent, authorized.net will fill in for me status number, status text, and response text. So this class now has everything that we need. It has a set post data method. It has a process method. It has all the properties that it needs in order to be able to process a credit card. So this class that we use is a generic class that's in our class library that goes into every application we build. Now, somebody might ask, I don't know if they've asked it in the questions, but can't we send it via JSON or something like that? And the answer is yes, you can. Way more complicated. Way more complicated. Sometimes good old text post strings are just the way to go. Now, we got a response in response text. Yikes, but it's a big old long response text thing where it's all jammed together. So we're parsing it. Usually, not always, gateways delimit their lines with these little vertical metics here. There's always a character that's only used as a delimiter. So we're creating a split here, and we're putting together the message. So it so happens that in authorized.net, the third sentence is the reason detail. The fourth is the reason text. The fifth is the authorization code. The sixth is the transaction ID, etc. So then what we do is, if we got an approval, we return to the calling program, yes, and the authorization code. If we did not get an approval, then we return a NEN and the reason for the decline or the error message, and the calling program has to figure out what to do with that information. This is part of our generic class library. Now you'll notice something interesting. There are 3 declines here, 2, 3, and 4. Transaction was declined, error processing transaction, and transaction under review. If you think that's meaningful, then you really know more about this than I do, because I can't figure out what that means usually. There is no good explanation given for when a card is declined. And that's what creates a lot of friction at the point of sale. The merchant is saying, your card is declined. And the person is saying, why? It's a good card. I just used it. I just charged $80 million on it 10 minutes ago. But the merchant has no idea. The card member has to call up their bank to figure out what's going on, because the acquiring bank will not send back any more information other than it's denied. The difference being is that with number 3, it wasn't denied because of lack of funds. It was denied because of some problem. Number 2, it was declined by the bank. Were you over your limit? Did they not like you anymore? Was the card canceled? Who knows? All right, now that our class is completed, so our class has set post data to make a big long posting string. It has process that posts the string, and then it parses the response it gets back in order to determine what the English quote-unquote answer is to this card request. Now we also then have in our library a routine like this. To call that class directly, requires every application would ever write to know a lot about that class. So instead, we've abstracted the key information into a routine that works as follows. You'll notice there's a long list of parameters here. The request type, the clerk, the comment, the card number, the expiration date, the amount. These are things that potentially our point of sale system or our application would have taken in. It instantiates the object, and then it updates the properties that are relevant. There's about 15, 20 properties you see here. It updates the first name, the last name, the city, the state, address, zip, cardholder, number, security code, expiration date, and address. It updates all of that. Some more. And then it looks and sees what was asked to be done. Let's back up for a second here. That first parameter is request type. Now, request type, we're charging a credit card. Well, remember those other things we can do? Void a transaction, get a pre-auth finalization, or issue a credit. Those are all different request numbers. Request number 1 simply means process the credit card charge. So then it instantiates the class, and it parses the response and returns it. There, the class is called, the process method of the class is called, which before it does the processing calls the set post data. And then it parses the string, and it gives an English answer to the calling program. So the calling program calls this routine. It says it'll call CC card with these parameters and wait for an answer. On some of our applications, a lot of this information for the processing in the class is all data driven, but it's not something the user has to see. Now we can use this to create a simple credit card processing form. We'll create a form, and we have on there the card type label, which we'll see in just a minute what that is, the amount, the card number, the expiration date, the security code, the name on the card, the billing address, the billing zip, and a couple of fields over here that I haven't told you what they do yet. But let's assume that our friendly user enters the information. $100, this is the credit card number. By the way, this is a famous test credit card number, 4 followed by 15 ones. Now, as soon as they put that in, we validate it and we write up here on the label Visa, just so that the customer can see that, yes, he's putting in his Visa number. There really is no need for that. It's simply a nice little user display for them. The expiration date, everything is filled in. But wait a second, you're saying, what if I want to put in this credit card information to be saved in my data tables, but it's already been approved? I'll give you an example. I went out with my portable data scanner and I took somebody's credit card outside. And it's supposed to automatically zap it back to the receiving end inside, but it didn't. But the transaction was approved. I can't run it again. What I can do is I can put it in a transaction and I enter my own approval code. And since an approval code has been entered, it will not try and send it to the gateway. That's called a manual authorization. It's not that common, but a manual authorization is a term and a concept we should know about. Or I could just press the swipe button. Swipe the card, the chip in, and I get my nice swipe string here, and I send it along. Now, all those properties, most of them don't have to be filled out if you have the swipe string. You just put the swipe string in its correct properties and you send it. The swipe string is gold. So on the process button, we're going to verify the fields are filled in. We're going to use our software validation to check the card number. Then we're going to instantiate our credit card processing object, call the routine with the amount and the person's name. It's going to call the process of our credit card, the process method of our credit card object. Then it's going to display the result. There's a whole sample of this code for this form. It's in the white paper. Now, this simple form can be used anywhere in the development world to be a black box form for processing credit cards. We have 5 forms that look similar to that. And whenever we need a credit card process, we drop it on, and we've added some properties into the class of where we want the data stored, etc. Now, we had gateway information. We accepted the credit card. We sent the credit card. We processed the reply. Oh, I said there were 6 points. There's 2 more. Affect the settlement. Settlements, oh, they're a pain. The settlement batch is the official name for it. Managing those settlements involves designating which transactions will be settled, recording a batch ID, confirming the batch was processed. Better always to get the client to set up an automatic settlement through their gateway. Even if they're a really big client and they want to automatically settle every 4 hours, automatically settle from the gateway, it should be a set and forget. And reporting is simply standard visual Fox for reporting on whatever data we've saved. Was it approved? How much it was, etc. Those are our 6 points that we interact with the processing system. Pardon me. Now, this credit card processing industry and system, it looks pretty simple when you're just putting your card in the machine. Or when the client says, no, I just want to be able to have them put their credit card in. But in reality, it's designed on top of a very complex network of components and participants. Just the basic processing using requires contingency planning, and clients who want to process the credit cards, they just want to have a simple and easy to use system. But our task is to take all this credit card information with the APIs and the VFP development that we know about, produce a smooth and deceptively simple system. So before we go into the next step, are there any questions about this?
Yes, we have a bunch of questions that have piled
Hit
up.
me.
So can a small business bypass gateways such as authorized.net and process directly with the acquiring banks?
No.
Okay.
If you have a terminal, the terminal will dial into the acquiring bank, but via software, no.
Okay. Does sending to authorized.net bypass using something like Stripe or Square, or are they competitors?
Competitors.
Okay. Does authorized.net use TLS? Should we
Yes.
consider using registry changes when using WinINet or WinHTTP?
Authorized.net, I'm just trying to remember. They believe they do use TLS. They have a bunch of requirements for what TLS and what SSL you have to use. They're eluding me at the moment. I have to look in the authorized.net docs as to what it requires in that area.
Okay. You may get to this later on, but just in case you don't, what about, and this may be too long of a question to answer now, but are you going to discuss security and PCI compliance, such as persisting card data?
Okay. Yes, in about 5 minutes.
Good. What do you put in the zip code for credit cards from countries that don't use zip codes?
Nothing.
Okay.
Zip codes are only for United States based cards.
Okay. And who ends up?
I'm sorry, Doug. I take that back. Canada also.
Okay. Who ends up paying the 2.x%, the buyer or the seller?
The merchant pays it, not the person buying the goods.
Okay. Looks like that is it for questions.
Okay. Now, I promise you a bit more because we also have EFT, ACH, e-check, and NACHA payments. Uh-oh. We want to be able to do automatically depositing e-checks. We want our customers to be able to go online and put in their checking account information. That sounds like a good idea. Shouldn't be too hard, right? I have seen so much confusion about these how it works. It's whenever it turns to these kind of transactions, I just roll my eyes because people don't generally know what they're saying. EFT is electronic funds transfer. And it refers to money being transferred from one bank to another within the U.S. banking system, period. It's not a technology. You can't EFT something. It seems like that would cover a lot of transactions, and it does. With the exception of wire transfers, any bank-to-bank payment is an EFT. It's a term. It's not a technology. It's not a standard. It's simply a descriptive term for what kind of transactions you're doing, one bank to another. That's an EFT, electronic funds transfer. It's a term, not a technology, not a process, not a standard. EFT transactions include the following: direct debit, direct deposit, mail order, telephone order, e-checks, credit cards, ATM transfers, and debit cards. Now, guess what? We've discussed credit cards. In the last two, we can't do ATM transfers and debit cards. So that leaves us with four things: direct debit, direct deposit, mail order or telephone order, which is when you call in your credit card, and e-checks. Guess what? They're all the same thing. EFT may consider them to be separate categories. And the reason for that is there is an organization called NACHA that sets the standards for all EFTs. And NACHA has divided it into these categories. But there is no difference. An e-check and an ACH and a direct deposit or a telephone are all the same thing. No difference. E-checks and ACH and direct deposit, all the same thing. Well, we do need a few more terms before we can continue on. ACH means the automatic clearinghouse. Every country has their own ACH system. Now, this is the actual electronic system that manages and moves the money. ACH is an electronic system. EFT is the term, and ACH is how it's done. I'm sending something that's an EFT transaction, and I'm sending it via ACH. All checks drawn on U.S. banks are sent by the receiving bank to the ACH processing center, where the monies are moved from bank to bank. We do need two more terms, though. Besides ACH, we should be familiar with the National Automated Clearinghouse Association, NACHA, sometimes called not complimentary, the Nachos people. It's the standard setting and supervisory organization for all ACH transactions. So let's back up again. EFT is the term. ACH is the system for how you affect EFTs, and NACHA runs and supervises the ACH. One more term, the ACH mechanism uses the money into the Federal Reserve. Therefore, the frequent reference to the ACH system is the Fed. Oh, the Fed is clearing checks slower. The Fed is clearing checks faster. The Fed doesn't really do anything. The Fed has the money in the bank. The ACH system moves it around. So when you say, oh, well, checks are processed by the Fed, but I don't know about e-checks, it's all the same thing. The Fed is just where the cash is sitting. So ACH is the mechanism to move it around, and EFT is the type of transaction that we're talking about. There is no method for approving any ACH transaction ahead of time. Like a credit card, you can have an approval. You cannot get an approval for an ACH transaction. There's no such thing. It's a complete risk. When a website takes an e-check, the bank gives them the money, and everybody hopes your check goes through. It runs on a whole lot of trust and a whole lot of hope, which so far it's making it work. There's no mechanism for approval. Now, credit cards or ACHs, which is a better way of doing things? I don't know how this just shrunk down. Oops. So need merchant processor. For credit cards, you do. ACH, you don't. So you need the bank cooperation. For credit cards, no. For ACH, absolutely. What's the availability? It's easily available for credit cards. Anybody can sign up for a credit card processor. ACH varies. There's an approval process, and they don't give it out quite as freely. It's not like candy like credit cards are. Individual processing, can you do one transaction at a time? With credit cards, yes. With ACH, no. Oh, no, you're saying, hold on. I've gone to a website, and I've put in one e-check to pay for something. Yep, you absolutely have. And it's fake. Because what's happening is the gateway or the processor is saving them all to the end of the day in a big batch and sending them to the bank. There's no such thing as a one-off ACH transaction for buying something on the web. Batch processing for credit cards and ACH is available. Real-time approval for credit cards, yes. ACH, no. Days to receive the money, 1 to 3 days for credit cards. And here's the thing. 1 day, you get your ACH money the next day. It used to be, if you've noticed, you get your money when you deposit a check much faster nowadays. And that's because it used to be the banks would wait 3 or 4 days to make sure, quote unquote, that the check cleared, that they got the money from the Fed by ACH. But it doesn't take 3 or 4 days. The banks were using that in order to make interest on that money in the meantime. So the government under President Clinton created a law that said you have to give them the money when it's cleared. So banks started building a big system to find out when each check is cleared, and that was just a disaster. So they give everybody the money the next day, and there's so few kickbacks that they hope that, which is why, by the way, when you get your money faster, your bounce check fees went up. If you deposit something that's no good, the fees are higher because they're giving everybody their money the next day. That's the main reason to accept ACH payments. You get the money right away. However, that means the bank is fronting you the money, and therefore an additional approval process is required. It's very easy to get a credit card merchant account. There are salesmen pounding down your door trying to get you to sign up for their credit card services. ACH, you have to be approved because they're fronting you the money. So if you want the money right away, ACH is the way to go. ACH is the way to go. Authorized.net calls their ACH thing echeck.net. It's almost the same API, so it makes it look like you're getting a one-off, but no approval code comes back because there is no approval code. But we'll get money the next day. The secret of processing transactions are notcha files. These notcha files are the batch files that I mentioned each night, and they're sent in a file format called the notcha format, since notcha invented it. They create these big batch files, and they send it in every night. Now, if you have an organization, let's say a school, and people pay their tuition every month on a credit card, every month on a bank draft, you can just create your own notcha file and send it to the bank and save money. Your bank has to cooperate with you with that. But the same way and what happens is it's so low tech. They take your notcha file that they get from you or from authorized.net or from whoever, and they just append it to their COBOL file that's already going up. So at the end of the day, they have a big batch file that's going up. They just append your records into it. So when we think of ACH transactions being super high tech, not so much. Credit cards are much more higher tech. And there's actually in the white paper, there is code about creating a notcha file. The format is easy to use because it's very old. Now our credit card man is going to have to do a quick change now because he's going to become PCI man. Any questions about the ACH EFT things?
Just one. Do you have any experience with Canadian companies paying U.S. vendors or vice versa using ACH?
I don't have any personal experience. According to the authorized.net documents, you can do it. But I have no personal experience to what kind of kinks or gotchas there might be.
Okay, that's it.
All right, PCI compliance. Oh, boy. Talk about those buzzwords popular today. PCI compliance. Stakeholders from corporate management, IT departments, independent developers inundated with the message it's important or critical that their company and its operations and its software be PCI compliant. Go search the web. You'll find an incredible number of websites, publications, services dedicated to explaining PCI and help you becoming PCI compliant. The vast majority of the information that's accepted as true is extraneous, irrelevant, or downright false. Let's see what we know. Let's do a little test. Now, if we were in person, I'd have you raise your hand. So you'll just think about it in your mind and you'll be honest with yourself what you picked. You're going to answer true or false to each of these 7 questions. Question number 1. PCI has a connection to a government body or agency. True or false? 2. PCI compliance is designed to test and ensure the integrity of a business's LAN or website. True or false? It is especially important for any business in the financial industry to be PCI certified. True or false? PCI compliance means never touching or storing credit card data. True or false? Not being PCI compliant can result in legal and liability issues. Oh boy, true or false? Given the myriad of federal and state laws, it's necessary to be PCI compliant in order to avoid unintentionally violating a law or statute. And finally, number 7, PCI compliance may be costly, but the fines for not being compliant are even worse. Now get your answers ready in your head. Okay, now I'm going to flip the answers. They're all false, every one of them. Number 1, PCI has a connection to government body or agency. No, there's absolutely no connection between any government body or agency of any government in the world and PCI. PCI is a standard created by MasterCard, Visa, American Express, and Discover, has no government connection whatsoever. Number 2, it's designed to test and ensure the integrity of a business's LAN or website. False. PCI compliance is not designed for LAN or website integrity. When we get a little bit further into PCI, we'll see there is a roundabout connection network security, but there's no such thing as certifying a network as as safe or PCI compliant. PCI compliant means never touching or storing the credit card data. Oh, I'm sorry, SIP one. It's especially important for any business in the financial industry. Absolutely false. There is no connection between stocks, banking, and any other companies like that and being PCI compliant. Not only are they not required to be PCI compliant, there's no means for them to do so. They couldn't do it if they wanted to. It just doesn't exist. Number 4, PCI compliance means never touching or storing credit card data. Ha! False. I can't tell you how many threads I have seen in VFP forums with people saying, oh, we did it like this and like this and this because it's important that we don't actually touch the data. We take it from the customer and send it to the gate without ever recording or storing it. Baloney, 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 baloney. Even Authorize.net on their website has a statement about how baloney it is. I have seen so many threads and people agonizing over how to do this, and it's not even a thing. Not being PCI compliant can result in legal and liability issues. Wrong. Being PCI compliant might show that you tried hard in good faith, but lack of compliance does not imply negligence or anything else. Number 6, given the myriad of federal and state laws it's necessary. Nope. No government agency or body at any level, city, state, county, national, has any connection to PCI and has no legal standing in any law or court system in the United States. 7, it's costly, but the fines for not doing it would be even worse. There are no fines for not being PCI compliant. PCI auditing vendors might present it that way, but there's no fines for not being PCI compliant. All false. PCI is short for the standard of PCI DSS. It's a voluntary set of standards created by a combination of the credit card networks. And this organization they created is called the PCI Security Standards Council. Now, each one of those 4 credit cards monitors the PCI of their own cards and encourages compliance. There's no enforcement mechanism. Here comes the big surprise. Hold on. The entire set of PCI standards that the world goes on about is designed only for the purpose of protecting 7 pieces of credit card data and no more. So, for example, if a company has a customer list stolen from their website, that is no connection to PCI, can't have one. The 7 data items are primary account number, cardholder name, expiration date, service code, full track data, the CVV code, and any PINs. By the way, those last 3 you are not allowed to store ever. If someone comes back to your site and reuses a credit card, you better not have their CVV on file or their track data. Now, it's not a law. MasterCard will get very mad at you. All PCI does is protect these 7 pieces of data, period. No more, not one drop more. And we are all familiar with the components that they're talking about of a credit card. It's a set of voluntary guidelines for managing credit card data to prevent misuse of these 7 pieces of data. That's what PCI is. Now, should you look at the standards and try and comply? Yes, you should. Now, if anybody ever complains about your data being handled, you can say, oh, we were PCI compliant. Well, PCI compliant, who determines if you're compliant? The answer is nobody. The council does not provide certification. So there's an entire industry of consultants who will evaluate your PCI compliance. Besides the fact they spend a lot of time checking things that are not connected to PCI, they count on you not knowing anything. Their certification is worthless, and the council even has a statement on their website saying that a certification from a PCI audit company means absolutely nothing. Every single data breach, Barclays, Target, those were all PCI compliant organizations that passed PCI audits. If you want an insult to injury, you can fill out a form online, attest that you reviewed your practices, and you're considered self-certified. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm coming out too hard. PCI itself is not a scam. It's a worthy attempt at security standards. And I would encourage everyone to look at it and to try it and follow along with it. But between misinformation, oh boy, and the amazing amount of just plain scamming, PCI has taken on a life of its own. Use PCI to ensure you're guarding those 7 pieces of data. But when people come around with sage advice or songs on PCI services, take a long, hard look at what they're saying. There's actually a book, PCI for Dummies. I kid you not. And a million guide books. There's only one place only to get information on PCI, and that is the official council website, which is listed here. No other website's information should be considered reliable. So PCI is a little bit not like what most people think it is. Okay, any questions on the PCI section, Doug?
Nope.
Okay, finally, It's our responsibility as developers to be able to provide our clients with accurate information, well-developed software process. VFP definitely gives us the tools to do that. We add to our knowledge base and our personal knowledge and our own personal database, the ability to use credit cards and other financial processing to give our clients the best tools possible. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Please fill out your evaluations. Thank you to the conference organizers. Enjoy. And there's a little note up there for anybody who's old enough to remember the old days from Fox. Thank you very much.